Welcome to the Rage Hard podcast, where we talk about how to get in touch with your emotions, connect to the universe with psychedelics, and charge really shiny crystals in the light of the full moon.
I'm just fucking with you.
I can remember one in particular, one guy saying, is a farmer who's like, what do you look like? Do you take it up the shitter? And that's all he said to me on the phone. So this is all I know about him before I turn up to the door.
All right, it's John Wood here, the founder of Rage Heart and the host of the Rage Heart podcast. I'd like to welcome you to the show if this is your first time or maybe your last time, we'll see, where I talk to all kinds of interesting people, including therapists, ayahuasca shamans and maestros, occasionally my pet cats, and today to a former professional dominatrix and sex worker. And we talk about all things nervous system healing, psychedelics, how to unleash the beast inside you. And today, as you'll find out, about sexual fantasies. Some generic ones, some normal ones, or a normal one, really, I should say. And some other fantasies that are a little bit outside the norm, let's just say. So that's today. Her name is Artemisia de Vine. And I'm not going to bother with a long intro here because she's going to tell her story in the podcast itself. She's a former professional dominatrix and sex worker, like I said, so she has a lot of stories to share. And I believe even a lot of wisdom to share, especially around the area of our sexual fantasies, which a lot of people are ashamed about. So hopefully, if we've done our job here with this episode, that's going to change after today. Okay? I even share some of my sexual fantasies, which made me a bit nervous when I dropped it casually into the interview. And I thought about removing it because I'm worried, what are people going to think, right? Our sexual fantasies are pretty personal. You know, I'm worried that people are going to judge me. People aren't going to think I'm the same kind of dude if they know what I'm into. But then as I thought about it some more, when I think about Rage Heart and what I want Rage Heart to be about, it's not about being someone, the person you think you need to be to please other people. You know, like I've said so many times before, it's about unleashing the beast, which is really just a reference to unleashing or getting in touch with the animal that's inside you. And if you look at animals, they don't care, for the most part, what people think about them. They are completely and totally themselves. And so instead of cutting out any of my personal shares in this interview about my own fantasies, I decided to leave it all in there because it's not super detailed. I don't think you have to worry too much about that. But, I want Rage Heart and I want to be an example that we don't need to be afraid of what people think about us, whether it's with our sexual fantasies or anything else. And so that's what I've done. So that's enough intro for that. I've got one review this week I'd like to read out from Cave Woman 8. She is a member of the Daily Grail. She's also inside the Rage Heart Academy, and she was so kind to leave me a podcast review on for the Rage Heart podcast on the Apple Podcast Store app, whatever you want to call that. She says, Cave Woman 8 says, Rage Heart rocks. I love listening to the Rage Heart podcast. John Wood is brilliant in the way he presents and teaches about nervous system healing. John adds a level of fun creativity unsurpassed by any other podcast. Also, I was dead and now I'm alive since joining the Rage Heart Academy and signing up for the Daily Growl. Feeling safe in my body now has changed my life in so many ways because of Rage Heart. I highly recommend all of John Wood's creativity. That review is from Cave Woman 8, like I said. If you'd like to get onto the Daily Growl, that's a daily email newsletter, go to rageheart.co, not com, just .co. Sign up for the Daily Growl on the homepage there, and you'll also find out, once you're on the Daily Growl, how to get into the Rage Heart Academy, which is where I teach a lot of the techniques for nervous system healing, techniques I tease a little bit in the show as well. So if you enjoy this show, if you enjoy this episode, it would blow me away. It would make my day, basically, if you would jump over to Apple or Spotify and leave, if that's where you listen to podcasts, and leave a review. 5 stars, 1 star, just make it interesting, whatever it is. And if it's funny, even if it is a 1 star, I'll probably read it out. But 5 stars is always appreciated, always preferred, 5 stars. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's get into the interview with Artemisia de Vine. All right, it's John Wood here, the founder of Rage Heart. I'm here with Artemisia de Vine. She is a former sex worker, former professional dominatrix, and former certified somatic sexologist who created tailored experiences for thousands of clients. She now works as a sexual fantasy coach and helps people understand why we have sexual fantasies, from mild to the wild ones, and gives them a framework to guide people step by step through the art and psychology of bringing sexual fantasies to life. And I wanted to get her on because I've actually worked with her before as a sexual fantasy coach, and she talked a lot about being in the body, learning to understanding your own boundaries, understanding safety, knowing how to feel that, not as a thought, and even working with fantasies, not from a mental, well, not only from a mental perspective, but from an embodied perspective, which is very much the same thing I'm talking about in a Rage Heart, not the sexual fantasy part. I suppose I touch on that sometimes, but more the embodiment piece of being in touch with sensation and feeling. And for that reason, I just thought she'd make a really interesting guest for the podcast. I think she has some amazing ideas that I haven't heard anyone else talking about. So just some ways of looking at and understanding our sexual impulses, all the little, crevices, all the different things we secretly fantasize about, and but maybe don't understand, and maybe even have a bit of shame about. So, and as I said in another podcast I did recently, sex and somatics, or sex and embodiment, probably 2 of my favorite topics. They're certainly 2 of the most fun things for me to talk about. So that's why I've got Artemisia de Vine here today. So, Artemisia, I have a question to begin with. Well, there's a lot of questions, but we'll start with one. What got you interested in sexual fantasies?
Well, first of all, I'd just thank you so much for having me here. I absolutely love that you called your podcast and your body of work Rage Heart. That is just fabulous. Rage is such a big, passionate, huge energy, and it's, I used to be so afraid of it. It's probably actually my learning how to be in relationship with rage in an embodied level that actually got me to a place where I could understand how we could get embodied relationship with desire, because desire is another big, hot, powerful state, right? It changes our way of thinking when we're in it. So I just love it. I love that you called it Rage Heart. That's fantastic. Good on you. I really resonate with that. But jumping to sexual fantasies, because that's what people like to hear about, is I guess my own taboo fantasies got me interested in it. How could I possibly make sense of my own strange sexual fantasies that just seem to bubble up out of my unconscious against my will and get me very excited. When I was a teenager in a extremist religious upbringing context, with massive good girlitis and feminism. So, and my fantasies were not feminist; they were the exact opposite. So how could I make sense of these taboo fantasies that were about being treated and treating others in ways that I didn't want to treat other people in the outside world? That's the first thing that got me intrigued, and trying to work out how on earth do we deal with power in this, all sorts of different things. But then the second part that got me interested is later in life, as you mentioned before, I became a sex worker and a professional dominatrix. And initially when I started, I was not doing it for holy reasons. I wanted money really quickly. I wasn't interested in analysing anything or making it holy. I was just like, okay, I need, $20,000 really quickly. How am I going to do that in my really boring admin job that gives me just enough money to eat out twice a week? And decided to give sex work a try. And I kept stumbling across responses to people's fantasies that it definitely got me intrigued. Let's put it that way. So it's actually the client reactions to me trusting their fantasy that got me intrigued. I was like, what is happening here? What is happening here? Did you ever did you start accepting your fantasies, or did you? I'm not the only one I'm pretty sure listeners there's lots of people who are going to be a bit confused about what to do with their fantasies, right? I'm not the only one.
I mean, yeah, like a lot of that resonates with me. Where I think the first time I took MDMA with my ex-girlfriend in Thailand. Some point through this night, it was a very sexy night, and some point during the night, the idea popped into my head of, what would it be like to put some makeup on or wear a dress? I'd never, up until that point, I mean, I think I'd done a little bit when I was like 6 years old or something, when you're playing around. But I'd never really even thought about that as a thing. And when that idea came up, it's like, what? Like, what? How is this a thing? How is this so interesting and exciting and compelling right now? And so that sparked, that was, 2017, so 6 or 7 years ago now. So since then, I've explored it quite a bit in various ways. And I think at different times there's been there can be a bit of shame or a bit of, I shouldn't be doing this, or I'm a dude, I'm happy being a dude, I like being a man. And yet there's this other part of me that's like, well, no, sometimes wouldn't it be nice to put some lipstick on, or, pretend you're a girl for a few hours. And over time, I think partly through learning from people like yourself, I've probably come to a place now where it's like, well, I mean, there's healthy and unhealthy ways to do anything, light and dark of everything. So it's not all good. It's not all bad. It's just another thing to explore. And it's been so much fun, and it's taught me so much. And so I think right now I'm in a place where, I accept it. It comes and goes, like comes in waves. You probably know this too. I'm guessing this is pretty common. It's not always there. Sometimes I couldn't care less. It's been a journey, but right now I'm like, this seems like it's just a part of me for the time being, and it's not going to magically disappear, and trying to get rid of it doesn't work. So, it's just me at the moment.
That's fantastic. I love it so much. And lots of people explore that, of course, in sex work, especially once I became a dominatrix, and people felt much more free to explore the things that were not so socially sanctioned versions of sex, right? So, and that's where the interesting reactions started coming from. That's what really got me intrigued. I mean, when I very first started, as I said before, I just wanted money, and then when I very, very, very first started, I didn't have any concept whatsoever of how to do a pre-session consultation. I was just threw myself in the deep end. Let's say I'm not risk adverse in my life. I'm just willing to give something a try. So I'd had these experiences where people would call up on the phone, and actually when I very, very, very first started, I was in the country towns, because I thought, I'm not the right body type. I'm not the right beauty. I'll just go to the country towns where they're going to be less fussy, and put an ad in the newspaper with my friend and say,
that's how you started.
You
just went to a country
blonde.
town, put an ad in the newspaper. Wow. Yeah. Cool.
Found a hotel room that was not going to kick us out, which is a big deal in of itself. And they're not always nice, those hotel rooms. They're a bit sleazy. And then you'd get these phone calls with people who were already in the altered state of consciousness of desire, because you are in an altered state when you're in a state of desire and you're sexually aroused. You think differently. You experience your own senses differently. Your logic is different. The way you treat yourself and other people is different. So we think of these altered states as these, going on a plant medicine expedition in the forest and in the jungle, like you were talking about with your plant medicine, and that is an altered state. But we move through altered states all the time. Even the rage is a change of consciousness, isn't it? Going into rage. Same with desire. Anyway, so they're not in relationship with their desire. These people who were calling me on the phone, they have no understanding about this. They're not in embodiment relationship at all. So they're saying, I can remember one in particular, one guy saying, he's a farmer, he's like, what do you look like? Do you take it up the shitter? And that's all he said to me on the phone. So this is all I know about him before I turn up to the door. So I didn't start at the sophisticated end, right? And so I turned up anyway. I went, okay, I'm going to go. So there's me in my my panel van driving through. This is back when we had paper maps, not GPSs. So it was some time ago now. And I'm, trying to find this damn farm in the driving down there.
Oh, you went to the farm. You didn't go to the hotel.
Yeah, I went to the farm. No, I went to an out call. That's called an out call rather than an in call. If they come to us, it's an in call. It's an out call if we go to them. And I had my own. I won't go into the security stuff, but yes, we had security in place. There's a. Yeah, we're not silly, but I went there, and as soon as I opened the door, he sees a real person in front of him. It's different. It's like, oh, you're not just the fantasy in my head that I can just say, do you take it up the shitter? There's a human being in front of me. And at that point, I shifted the power dynamic. I learned how to do that really quickly. Like, I'm leading, thanks. And the whole experience went from there. And we ended up, walking through his house and full of, dogs and couches that are floral and upstairs to a bedroom. And this was just vanilla sex, right? But it was dirty sex as far as he was concerned. It was taboo. It was from his fantasy. And I followed what was the underlying, I trusted his fantasy, and I went within my own boundaries. I didn't actually take it up the shitter. I didn't want to. So, but I found what was behind that desire and played with it. And I just did it all intuitively. And I followed it. And by the end, this really, really strange thing happened. And it kept happening. These things, we were both crying. We were both looking into each other's eyes, so touched and crying. And our hearts expanded. And he's looking at me with tears rolling down his face going, what was that? I didn't think since my wife had died that I could ever feel that again. What was that? What was that? And I didn't know. I was like, I don't know. But wow, what was that? Where did we go just then? What? And how did we get there? And then I shrugged and left and never saw him again. And but this experience kept happening, not every time, but it kept happening. And I kept being really curious about that. Why are we ending up in these heart expanded states of consciousness where our guards are fully down and we're just feeling connected, and there's feels like a transcendent experience, or maybe a better word. Transcendent sounds like up, and also there's levels of hierarchy. It could be an expanded state of being. That might be a better way of saying it. More of us was awake and was there. What was happening? Mm-hmm. So this got me really intrigued. So I started trying to learn from anyone in the world. I learned from some of the world's best experts. That's when I learned I got into somatics, and I became a sexological body worker, and I learned from the Tantra people and various other spiritual sexuality traditions. And while I'm so grateful for everything that I learned, it wasn't answering what I was experiencing. All of these traditions were trying to focus on being really present with your senses and your partner to get to these ecstatic states. None of them was following the smut like a treasure map to these states, like I was. And I was like, what is going on here? How are our taboo sexual fantasies so magical? What is happening, and why isn't everyone talking about it? So this is what got me on my path to working out the magic, the value, and my own new theory about why we have sexual fantasies and the meaning behind them.
This is so interesting to me because I haven't really, I mean, I'm way less, in this might be a bit more well known now, but no one's really talking about this. Like you said, even now, it's all about sensation and being totally present with what's happening. And there's all these different seemingly spiritual techniques for, in the context of sex, hacking into some of these states. But I don't usually, pretty much all the time, the attitude towards smut, as you called it, is negative. It's, there's something wrong there, there's something to fix, something to heal. This is from some trauma in the past. There's something, that's the general attitude that most people have, even people that I meet a lot of. I'm in Peru, plant medicine metropolis. And so you meet a lot of fairly open people, but even here, there can be, you can even see there can be this certain closed mindedness. I don't know how else to describe it around, say, stuff like this. So this is why it's so interesting to me. I don't really have anything other than that to say, but it's very interesting. And I know you've got, this led to you to develop a method. There's a method to this madness that you figured out.
There is a method to this madness.
What's this method?
Well, I call it the divinery method because after I didn't stay in the country town newspaper zone, I ended up doing all sorts of things all around Australia, but eventually setting up a play space in Sydney, and that had multiple different rooms. There was a cross-dressing room, there was a dungeon, there was a sensual massage and bedroom area. There was all sorts of different. There was domestic discipline area. So it was like this place that was a theatre of the erotic psyche, where we could play anything in there. And I had a red velvet couch that people would come and sit on, and we'd talk about their desires and their fantasies before we'd begin. And one of my clients who came and played here, actually, he named my play space. He said, you know what? Every time I come here, I feel like I am this is a combination of two clients, actually. One came up with the name and one yeah, anyway, never mind. I'm merging them together as one person. Okay, so you can do that when you tell stories. He called it the divinery because he felt like he was divining every time, like he's looking through, the divining stick's looking for water. He felt like he was divining his erotic self every time he came there and discovering more treasure. Also, it's because my last name, Divine. So ever since then, it's just been nicknamed by everyone the divinery, and this is the method that I used in there when I sat them down on my red velvet couch and I asked them about their sexual fantasies and their peak experiences. And I listened, and I didn't just listen to I learned very quickly it's not effective to just try and live out somebody's sexual fantasy the way it is in their mind's eye. It doesn't actually satisfy them in the way that they think it would. It's much more important to hear the actual story narrative and the psychological mechanisms inside the fantasy and bring those out of our heads and into our bodies through the theatre of consensual play and see where we go with that. Where does that lead? And it was a radical thing to trust their fantasy was right. Like you said before, like your desire just bubbled up out of you. You didn't consciously choose to have that desire. You consciously chose to interact with it, but it just arrived from somewhere unconscious into your awareness. I think that there's always a reason for that. And if I trusted that, like there's just like it can be uncomfortable to trust that our rage is right. It's uncomfortable to trust that our desire is right. But just like we don't let the rage run rampage, We learn how to embody it, interact it, hear its voice, hear what it's actually trying to say. Same with desire. So if I listen to those sexual fantasies, and then I would create something from there, a play experience. And even though they had literally just told me their sexual fantasy, they were always surprised. They were always like, whoa, how did you know? That's exactly what I've been trying to experience my whole life. I finally found it. What is that? What is that? So, bless them. That was such fun to be part of that reaction, I tell you what. Does that make sense? That's the divinery method, is the method that I used in there. And the actual key, I guess, the really big takeaway is what I discovered through really living out the sexual fantasies of thousands of people. Like, I didn't just sit behind a desk like the therapist did and analyze it, or an academic. I lived it with them. I went into the play zone and lived it with them, right? Thousands of them. I added it up. It actually is thousands. I was like, whoa, okay. I discovered that we are consistently, when we follow the map of the fantasies, ending up in a place that is our ego guards are down. We can connect. So from there, I came up with the theory that our sexual fantasies are the exact story that our ego needs to hear to let its guard down so we can enter into the vulnerability of connection, pleasure, play, and sometimes even those expanded states of consciousness that lie beyond ego. And this is one of the most precious things that you can share with another person on the planet. To be in that, to discover yourself. Who am I beyond ego in this place of embodied experiencing and play? Who am I? And sharing that in the state of play with somebody else. That's so precious.
This is great. It's interesting what you said about rage. Like, part of like working with, somatics, working with the nervous system, or rage, or whatever the feeling happens to be, is kind of going, whatever's there, like, it needs no justification. If all the justification it needs is that it's there. If you're angry, you're angry. If you're sad, you're sad. Whereas often with to use anger or rage as an example, people are like, oh, no, I can't be angry. Like, I don't have a good reason to be angry. It's not spiritual or religious to be, like, God doesn't want me to be angry. I just have to turn the other cheek. We have all these stories around why we shouldn't feel what we feel. And it's a part of, what I'm trying to do with Rage Art is help people to understand that, no, whatever you're feeling is perfect. It's exactly what you're meant to be feeling right now, or was what you meant to be feeling whenever it was ago. And so it's interesting. You sort of drew a parallel there. I just want to highlight it that, I see that with emotions and sex, fantasies, these things that bubble up out of nowhere. Like, it's the most fascinating, bizarre thing when, I've gone into certain fantasies and it's like, oh my God, how does that turn me on? How is that doing that to my brain right now? Like, I don't understand it, but for some reason, it just pushes a button somehow. And my mind, it's so funny because the mind can't figure it out. It's like this, it's not logical. It's not something I would have ever consciously chosen. And yet it's undeniable, the response that it has. And that it's such a fascinating, it's so interesting for me just looking at how is it just, that's so wild. And so it's interesting that bringing in that perspective with emotions where whatever's there, whatever it is that's turning us on, it's okay. There's healthy and unhealthy ways to go and do it in the real world, but the fantasy in and of itself, and I guess you would say the drivers that are underneath it, are magical.
They have their own wisdom. They absolutely have their own wisdom. I imagine this being inside our unconscious, just as a story to kind of conceptualize it, not a scientific model. But I imagine this being sitting in our unconscious called desire, and it's inviting us to let go of our everyday thinking and enter into this wonderful ocean state of a different state of consciousness where we can access ourselves beyond ego. And it's sitting there sending symbolic messages to our own ego so that it can let its guard down. So of course it's not logical. It's ego logic and desire logic. Imagine a conversation happening between the organ of the psyche that is desire and the organ of the psyche that is ego, and trying to convince it tell it exactly the right seductive story, that it's going to be allowed to let its guards down. So ego is concerned with, what does ego do? It gives us a sense of self. And a sense of self, it creates it and it protects it vigilantly, like soldiers on a wall not letting anything in, right? Dragons on a wall, if you like. Guards. It won't let them, it doesn't like vulnerability at all, ever, ego. It's against it entirely. And it's amazing. We need a sense of self or we cannot walk through the world. We don't even remember to lock our car door to protect it from somebody else taking it if we don't have a concept of self, because we don't know that there's a self to protect. And ego, I like to call it the three S's of ego, the three guards of ego that the story needs to address. So imagine that there's this wonderful world over a bridge where you can be connected. You're not just focused on self. You're moved into we, and maybe even connection with we, another person or other people, or maybe even beyond that into connection with life itself. There's this wonderful land that's over there but you have to let go temporarily of your sense of self or the guards around yourself in order to get there. But on this bridge, there's three little guards, and they are self-identity, your status, and your self-worth, right? All of the self stuff that ego likes to defend enormously, right? So you can't get across to the bridge unless you somehow appease these three guards. You have to tell them, and desire, being a seductive siren of the ocean state of our unconscious, sings a song, tells a story that's going to appease each of those fears around our identity, our self-worth, and our status. So self-worth is how do I value myself? I am lovable because I'm so smart. I am lovable because I fit the gender stereotype that is sanctioned by society. I am lovable because I am manly. I am or pretty or whatever it is that we get our self-worth from. And these are fine, but they can get in the way of trying to let go. The next one is self-identity. I'm a good girl. I don't be selfish. I can't focus on myself. I can't feel this pleasure. I need to be of service to somebody else. I'm a good boy. I can't be primal. I might hurt her. Right? I can't, and that's heterosexual examples, but clearly it can be any gender. But let me think of some more inclusive examples as well. But the next one is status, which is status is that the ego vigilantly defends is our power rank in society. Like, where do we sit in the hierarchy? We're below these people and above those people. Okay, this feels like a good comfort zone. This is where I am. I can't leave here. And it's a really primal state because if we don't belong to society, our self is under threat because we will die. We can't survive without other people. We can't get access to resources. We're not part of the tribe. We won't survive. So losing rank comes up. Ego gets hyper vigilant about defending that in all sorts of subtle little ways. Like, did you just talk down to me? Do you think you're above me in rank? I need to pull you down a peg or two. Rah, 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 says ego, right? You made me lose my status, right? So these three S's come up in all sexual fantasies, all of them, romantic ones, smutty ones, all of them, and they must be navigated in order to let go, or you can't let go. So that's when I discovered that, sexual fantasies are the exact story, as I said, to allow us to be vulnerable, to let these guards down. But to do that, you have to include ego's fear. And I call that the poison. You have to actually include what it's scared of, what's blocking it from letting go in the actual story, and then also take really close notice of how the fantasy created a really clever antidote to that fear and triggered it so that they could let go. And oh my God, when I discovered how to do that in the divinery, I was talking to another dominatrix who's wonderful in Seattle. Her name's Catherine Control. We were talking about how you reach a certain point in the session where you've told the story through a lived experience, an embodied experience of their own psyche. You brought their psyche to life, and you get to the point where they drop. Just the bottom just drops out of them, and then they just open into this other state of being. And you can feel it viscerally, like the whole air in the room changes. They drop. Such a wonderful, powerful thing to do. But to do that, we took on the theatre of the inner world. We became the villain or the hero or the victim. We became the very things that ego feared the most, and then also included the antidote to that. And if you really deliberately hear that when you listen to a fantasy and embody it, then that's when everything clicks. So that makes sense to you. Am I going too geeky? Because I do geek out.
No, I mean, I haven't been there with like, I know that bottom dropping out. I haven't been there with sex or with fantasies, with this kind of stuff, but it's happened with psychedelics, which I know some people, for them, it's like you mentioned, or you've mentioned before, religion or spirituality. Like that's another vehicle. For me, it's been, using certain spiritual techniques with magic mushrooms or LSD or ayahuasca. And, there can be a bit of a struggle at first. I remember one time with mushrooms beside a river in Thailand, and the mind is like, no, doing something, basically just a certain awareness practice. And at some point, something happened. I don't even know what it was, but I could just dropping in. Like the drop is a really good word for there's this sense of I just drop into the center of my being, like infinitely deeper than whatever the mind is that's way up on the surface. I'm down at like the mind is these waves on the ocean. I'm like down in the Mariana Trench, like 10 or 12 kilometers beneath the surface. And there's just, yeah. So I've had that with psychedelics. So it's so interesting. So I know it exists. So it's interesting to then go, I've had that, but you can have that with music. I do jiu-jitsu at the moment, like certain sports practices, almost like a flow state. But it's interesting. It's really interesting to me to kind of, oh, wow, like there's a way to do this with sexual fantasies, which is crazy.
Sexual fantasies are the exact map to get there if we know how to hear it. So this is, absolutely. Plant medicines, that's the other reason that my last name is Divine. The Divine is a nod to plant medicine and ayahuasca. So, and everything that I learned from that as well. So this is not learnt entirely from sex work alone. It's informed by my experiences with ego dissolution through all sorts of different ways, and then it kept happening in sex as well. And putting the two together, realizing that they're actually just a different way of getting to the same thing. Getting into the same place. Yeah, that whole dropping into yourself. And people would say things like clients who had, no attitude other than that they just first initially thought, I don't know, I just want a big busty woman with a strap on to tie me up and Roger me, thanks. That's it. They'd had no more thought than
Roger
that
me.
coming to see me.
Take it up the shitter.
Don't you like that too? Take it up the shitter. Good rogering. Anal play for people who want to be more sophisticated about it. Anal play.
Just to be clear, in case you were confused.
The sexologists want to use the technical term, but I like to use the language that our psyche comes up with, because that's where the power lives. What was I saying? You were dropping down into the Mariana Trench. What was happening?
the Mariana Trench and just being so deep. And you were saying that you've learnt this is all informed by some of the experience you've had with plants, with psychedelics, and then seeing that it was happening with fantasies as well.
Oh yeah, and they'd come in with no intention.
The dude.
Yeah, they had no intention of getting to any expanded state. That wasn't the motivation at all. When you're in the early stages of the enticing story of the enticing siren call of desire with your fantasies, it doesn't feel holy at all. It doesn't feel anything like that end state that we got to. It just feels taboo or naughty or exciting or any of those feelings. It feels like the opposite to these expanded states that people call spiritual states. And yet the story gently moves you along to that state. And by the time you get to the end, I can remember lying on the floor with clients, we're covered in all sorts of lube and just mess everywhere. And by the end, we're lying there and we can't even, our hearts are expanded. We can't even remember why we wanted to do the smut in the first place, even though we literally just finished doing it. But we've now dropped so deeply into this other state that it's taken us to that we're thinking differently again. We're experiencing ourselves and everything else differently again. But it was the smut that got us there. So, and they would say to me things like, wow, I had no idea I could feel this way. This is what I've been searching for my whole life. This feels like I'm on ecstasy and tripping at the same time, but I haven't taken any drugs and it feels as though I am the most grounded and present I've ever been. This feels like I'm whole now. And these are people who just came in with the attitude of, do you taken up the shitter love at the beginning of the story? So if you follow, and I'm not saying that happened every time because that's ridiculous. It doesn't. And you don't necessarily even want to aim for that. That becomes goal-oriented and it's a ridiculous thing to do. But it does shift you from this cut off separate, walls up state to all the walls dropped and now there's a possibility of connection with somebody else. Then if you go even further, there's a connection with possibly even the land itself and the sky and life itself and this feeling of being oneness, those oneness feelings. And they happen sometimes. But I don't encourage anyone to be goal-oriented in it. I just say, let's see what your fantasies have brought to the table because they know, they have their own wisdom. They're geniuses at changing your internal state. They're absolutely rubbish at giving you instructions of how to behave literally in the outside world. Don't believe them for that. But they are brilliant for changing your internal state of consciousness. And in the consensual container of play, that's where you can find their magic.
So on that note, I'm curious, you've mentioned like the 3 gardens of ego, poisons and antidotes. Can you give me some examples of how this would look in practice?
Sure.
Like if someone comes in with a specific fantasy, how would you do this? How would you apply this? Let's
start with a socially sanctioned one because people who think that they don't have sexual fantasies do, by the way. It's like dreams. Some people think, I don't have dreams. Yes, you do. So it's just that you might not be aware of them just at this point. So I haven't actually encountered anybody. Maybe there is somebody with a neurodivergence where you don't have sexual fantasies, but when you take a closer look, pretty much everyone has them. Romance, the romantic classic fairy tale of Disney, is a sexual fantasy. It's a swoon fantasy, right? This whole, I know I've got in my head a picture of hippie women wearing white wafty things in the forest.
You mean like a movie?
Saying, this is just like my visual of my imagination when I'm thinking of this kind of fantasy of people going, oh, but I just want a man who's like this. he will just be magically so perfect that he just has his full attention on me, and he's powerful but doesn't hurt me, and he's this impossible god of romance that just happens to magically be exactly what she wants him to be, so that she can feel loved and special. She can feel like she's the only one, and she's so special. And this fantasy is socially sanctioned. We say, oh, that fits our idea of how gender roles should be. So that's not a fantasy. That's how your man should be, right? It's a fantasy. Men are just humans. Men have the full spectrum of foibles and talents, and can't possibly live up to that level of manliness of this particular fantasy. But let's look at the fantasy itself. A really common one coming from that place is, let's think of heterosexual women, but it certainly can apply to anyone really. But let's just pick one where she's fantasizing about having someone be primarily ravish her. Wants to really, just consensually but primarily ravish her, because he can't, he wants her so much that his desire is gone primal for her, and he'll hold her down maybe, but in all the right ways, and he will take her, right? And he does all the doing and she gets to be receptive, right? This is the fantasy, the story. She gets to keep her status. Remember the 3 guards? Let's get to those now. The 3 guards. She gets to keep her status as the good girl who doesn't do those dirty things. That comes from him and his desire. So I'm a good girl. Oh, look, I didn't do it. I was just innocent. He ravished me in all of those dirty ways in which I really wanted. Right, so you get to protect your own identity right there and still access this place beyond the bridge in this land. And there's power play in there, right? And so the other thing that it does is it really protects your self-worth, and that is, I'm so desirable, he can't control himself. Look at how special I am. Ego is now appeased, and you can feel safe to let it down, and you can now open to just pure experiencing. Look how special I am. All fantasies do that, by the way. All fantasies make us feel like we are the specialist special that ever specialed in one way or another. Mm-hmm. Right? So because it's trying to appease ego, and ego wants to be special. Ego wants to be precious and valuable. And status, right? So I get to keep my status in the community. I get to be a good girl, because girls won't. If girls actively want sex and go and proactively get it, they're the bad girls. They'll get cast out of society or out of the tribe, and then you risk losing your safety in the tribe. So we need it to come from the man, so that we can feel as though we've protected that status as well. Yeah. Did that make sense? Ask questions if it didn't.
Mm-hmm. Oh, totally. No, it's making sense. I'm just thinking about my own fantasies at the same time. I'm like, oh yeah, that's interesting. Oh, you put that together there. And yep. Okay. No, it makes sense. Like, I understand what you mean.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what would it be like for, that's, it's interesting thinking. It's like that's the socially sanctioned thing is just a fantasy like everything else. It's no better or worse. It's just a fantasy, whereas a lot of people think that's what you should want. If you want something else, something's wrong with you. But it's interesting is I put them all on an equal footing. They're all just fantasies based on who someone is and what their specific keys are for their psyche.
Right. And how much more powerful is it when you realize that they're all fantasies? Then we stop trying to make them reality and try and expect our partners to be our fantasies, And we can deliberately go, hey, can you play this role for me? Can we have a date? It starts at this time, finishes there. I'd really love an experience of feeling this and this and this. Are you willing to play this role for me in part or in full? Can we negotiate that? And take turns really getting our needs met once we recognise that that's what it is. And then coming out of that and being able to relate without projecting our fantasies onto everyday life, but seeing the actual person in front of you and really connecting with them. It's a really powerful thing to do, to realise how much of our romantic and sexual fantasies we've misdirected by projecting onto everyday life and not giving it its safe container where it should be played with as a story to shift you somewhere inside of yourself together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it like puts, I'm going to say takes all this shame that people have around this stuff and starts to go, well, yeah, maybe if you went and did some of these things in real life as a fully lived out thing, it might be a little bit hairy depending on the execution, but done in like a play scenario, which can be quite different. It sort of takes them and goes, there's a lot of beauty and wisdom and goodness and medicine in fantasies. And yet, typical of our culture, we're trying to push it. A lot of people are trying to push it away, or it's in the shadows, in the darkness, which creates a lot of problems. So it's so interesting to kind of go, okay, what's there? Like I've noticed with my own fantasies, like the cross-dressing, wanting to wear makeup, trying to push it away or not do it, trying to get rid of it, doesn't work. It's the strangest thing. I can't get rid of it. Not consciously anyway. Maybe one day it'll change, but I've learned that like trying to like control it, trying to be like, no, I'm not going to do this, doesn't work. You see this in, with religion and churches, priests, oh no, we're not going to have sex. We're not going to do anything sexual. We can just let that go because we're so holy and spiritual. Shit comes out sideways somewhere else. If you're enjoying this podcast and you'd like to get more podcasts like it, hit the subscribe button to be notified of future episodes. And if you have 33 seconds, I'd love it if you could hop over to Spotify or Apple and leave me a review. Leave a review for the Rage Heart podcast. Whatever stars you think it deserves, and the funny the review. Especially 1-star reviews can be surprisingly interesting and funny. But all the reviews help me get this information out there as well, help it rise up inside the podcast platform. So hit the subscribe, leave me a review. You can see this in, with religion and churches, priests, oh no, we're not going to have sex. We're not going to do anything sexual. We can just let that go because we're so holy and spiritual. Shit comes out sideways somewhere else. It
really does.
The energy wants to move. And so there's a lot of wisdom, I think, in allowing it expression, even if it's a bit outside the what some people might consider normal. So anyway, what about some other fantasies?
Yeah, I'll give you some other fantasies. I just wanted to quickly say it's so powerful to recognize that all of our desires are all of our turn-ons are based on this same story to appease our egos, right? You think about your peak experiences where the sex just worked. Think about the circumstances around it. It actually appeased the same 3 guards of ego to get there. But once you recognize that and you start dating somebody, so imagine you, John, start dating one of those hippie women wafting in white in the forest and who wants to be ravished by a manly man.
My favorite.
And you want to cross-dress. Yeah. They're all wonderful. Everything's wonderful. But once you now acknowledge that they're fantasies, you can take turns. People go, what? What do you mean you can take turns? No, you can take turns. And it is actually, even though it's not your primary turn on, it is the most wonderful fun. You can go deep into the play, the flow of play with this together. And it is the most intimate and wonderful experience to share this, so much more intimate than just trying to force somebody into your particular favorite unique erotic wiring, your map, your fantasy map to get to these places. Nobody's map. That's one thing I've learned with being with thousands of people is nobody's map is the same. None of them. So I might get 6 cross-dressers coming for a week and I have to sit down and listen to each one of them because their particular story sent by their desire to appease their ego is going to have different poisons and antidotes, different emotional aphrodisiacs, different power dynamics. I need to hear what they are so that I can create something that's going to work for their psyche. So nobody's turn-ons are the same as yours. So we do have to take turns exploring each other's. And it doesn't mean that we're not a good romantic match because we're not turned on by the exact same things. Right? Just putting that out there. But I can give you another fantasy. And let's go with a heterosexual man's fantasy. This is a real person's fantasy who's a client of mine who's given me permission to use this as an example for teaching purposes. Bless him. Lots of my coaching clients do that, actually. They give permission and then I share each other's fantasies amongst all of my clients, and they get to learn from each other this way, which is really fun and really affirming too for everybody. So this fantasy is there's a man who is in everyday life totally fine with gender, there being more than two genders, doesn't care about gendered bathrooms. In reality, doesn't care about that at all. But in the fantasy, a man's bathroom is a man's bathroom. And women shouldn't go in there because it's an important plot point for the story, because fantasies are just stories, right? So he's washing his hands at the basin and a man's public toilet, and a woman pokes her head around the corner because she's sick of waiting for the women's line, which is 10 million years long. And she's not assertive or bossy. Her attitude, always take notice of people's attitudes in fantasies. That's key to tapping into the right level of psychological safety for someone. So she sticks her little head around the corner and she goes, sorry. But she's kind of like, it's like one of those kind of sorries that's sorry, not sorry, I'm going to do it anyway. But she's not being aggressive, and she pokes her head through and she just comes in even though he's there and walks into the stall. And his initial emotional reaction is living out the resistance. Remember the three guys living out, who does she think she is? Ruh, ruh, ruh. Coming in here, indignant. She goes into the stall because it's a fantasy. She does her business in about half a second, comes back out again, and he's still washing his hands in the basin, and she catches his eyes for just a moment, glinting cheekily with a little smile on her face of her own confident self-worth, and catches his eye and then ducks behind him so he can't see her anymore. The next thing he knows is he sees hands coming around from behind him and unzipping his fly and giving him a lovely hand job from that point there. So this is a really short fantasy, and yet it includes all of the elements in there, right? It includes everything, because first of all, he can't desire it. It has to come from her, because he wouldn't... He doesn't want to. I just have inside information. I know he's actually a really cool guy who's really considerate and wouldn't want to impose his own primal desires on anyone who didn't want them. So it has to come from her. She wants to be dirty in the public place. She wants to be the one that is, and it is public, right? It's literally going against this social status. You're not supposed to do that here, right? We've got this inner conflict. We can't do this. We can't access our primal state. We have to prioritize the rules of the world. We have to be good citizens, keep our status in place, right? But she breaks that rule for him too, so that he is now allowed to access this primal state that's beyond his socially accepted status role. And she comes in and sneaks behind him. There's a cheeky power play thing, because she kind of knows she knows her effect that she can have on him. She's not dominating him, but it's a cheeky game of, I know what I can get you to feel, and I'm going to play with this, and he feels wanted. He feels absolutely desired. Here's this woman who wants his cock so much she can't help herself. Ta-da! Don't we always want to be wanted? There's our self-worth and our being and our feeling special. I remember how we always have to feel like the most special person ever. And she also, I love that she ducked behind him. This is a very common thing, is that we find some way to temporarily make the other person's needs not matter. We don't have to caretake their needs for them, so that we can finally give ourselves permission to focus on ourselves, which so many of us struggle with. We want the other person to have fun. We want them to have pleasure. We want to focus on them, but we can't fully just surrender and let go into our own pleasure if we're focusing on them. So we need some story that convinces our ego, yes, you are still a genuine, considerate person, but now you're allowed to focus on your own pleasure for a moment. So this is could you see the pattern in there? Did that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm. Oh, totally. Totally. It's pretty deep. I mean, it's such an interesting way to, I imagine, it's like, I've heard this before. Like we worked together. I've read some of the books you recommended. Like, I'm familiar with this model of thinking, but I can imagine for someone listening to this for the first time, it's going to be, or it could be a bit like, holy shit, like what? Just as a way to think about, because you can map this onto any fantasy. And so, like, if I was hearing, even I'm doing it anyway, and I already know about some of this stuff, I was thinking, okay, well, like, I'm thinking through my own fantasies, I'm like, okay, what about that? Oh, yeah, that fits there. And it's like this model, this framework. It makes sense to me. It makes a lot of sense to me. It's one of those things that makes sense. It's a bit like the nervous system model, understanding fight and flight and freeze and how we get stuck in these modes. Before I heard about it, it was like, I didn't really know what was missing. And then I learned it. I was like, oh, this is it's like someone turned a light on. Now all of a sudden I understand so much of what's been going on. And it's a bit like that, where it makes sense, but like in a way, does that make sense? In like a way where it's like before, not that I didn't think it didn't make sense before, but now it's like, oh my God, no idea that I could look at fantasies or look at this sex in this way. It's kind of, once you see it, it's kind of hard to unsee it.
Yeah, it's my unique theory. So as far as I know, there's no books on this yet, except for the one that I happen to be writing right now, which if you'd like, I'm starting a crowdfunding thing to pay, because I'm going to self-publish, to pay for the expenses of editing and getting an audiobook made. So if anyone's keen to hear more about that, I'm keen to just
I'm down to learn more.
Make that noted. That's a thing. It is something you can't learn from one podcast. Like, I've just touched on it, and there's like if I just heard my own explanation of it, I would still have a lot of questions. But this is something that it's an art form. So learning how to do this in coaching, I take people through step by step. Like, let's feel this, because it's taking it out of the head and into the body and into play. That is where all of the power happens, right? So, you can say, okay, that's great. Now I understand why, my ego is doing that. How do I actually do that? I need to build some embodiments, tools. And it has to begin with forming an embodied relationship with desire itself. That's where we begin. This force inside of us that creates these turn-ons in the first place. So the very first thing that I teach people is the desire compass. And you can do the very first part of that. Go to my website and just check it out and see if it's for you. It's embodiment tools right there to actually form a two-way relationship with this force inside of yourself, so that you can cooperate and turn it into your ally and start delving into this path.
Is this something that, like, you talk about going from the mind into embodied play? One of the first questions that pops into my head, which I imagine be the same for a lot of people, is what if I don't have a partner? Like, do I have to do this with my wife, girlfriend, husband, whoever, or can I do this on my own?
Yeah, I don't currently have or desire a partner. I'm going through a phase where I don't. I have a great sex life, and I'm using all of these techniques. I'm just not including anybody else.
Can you? So, I think I've asked you this before, but it's interesting thing to talk about on a podcast is that dropping that you talk about. Can you trigger that just playing with yourself without anyone else there?
Yes, I can. I absolutely can. I can totally dom myself into subspace.
That's fucking crazy. Is it a consistent thing, or it just happens when it happens? So you're not goal driven with it, but does it happen? Is it like once every couple of years, or is it you can kind of do it fairly regularly?
I know the way. I've got well-worn paths. I can. I know the way, so I can enter. And once I'm in that state, I can just play in it and float in it, and enjoy it for a long time if I choose to. Yeah.
So that's kind of the that's the payoff for people if they want to get into this and they want to learn more about this, is they can learn to trigger some of these feelings, these deep expanded states with a partner, but even without a partner. Whether it's, it doesn't
really
even have
valuable.
to be a dominatrix. You could just dom yourself.
Yeah, you totally can. Yeah, and it's really valuable to know that, because then you recognize that the pathway was always inside of you, which means that if you can ask somebody to come in and take a certain role for you and play with you in that, but you don't need them to be turned on by the same things. You just need them to really want to play with you and delight in that process. But it's never coming from them, which means that it can't ever be taken away from you if they leave. It was always coming from you, which is a really important thing to notice. But yes, you don't need a partner to begin this training at all. To learn how to do
when
this.
you say, I'm just trying to ask the questions that I think people are going to want to know. When you say bringing it from the mind into an embodied relationship with desire, to me that still sounds, just playing the devil's advocate, it still sounds a little bit conceptual. So, like, what do you mean to someone who's maybe they haven't even explored embodiment to a high degree? Like, even I don't often use the word embodiment, even in Rage Chart, even though that's a huge part of what it is. I find for people, if someone's been in their head for the last 50 years, it's like this, just going, the embodied feeling. I get it, but I think a lot of people, everyone's at varying stages or degrees of that journey. So what do you mean by embodying or having an embodied relationship with desire?
Okay, so if you sit and watch a movie, and it's a beautifully done movie, you can have an entire experience the whole way through. You can notice your emotions changing. You can cry with, at the sad parts. You can get triumphant when the baddie gets their comeuppance. You can get you feel all of these emotions as you move through, as you watch the movie. And starting to notice these emotions and changing with the characters as well, because all stories are based on transformation and moving from one state to another. And you move with them by watching this movie. Even if you're not conscious, you just think, I was just watching a movie. It was just entertainment, right? But stories are way more magic than that. We've got to give them the credit. They're just powerful, powerful things, stories. But that's watching the story. And still, the first level of embodiment would be noticing the feelings and really physically, how do I feel when I feel triumphant? Physically, how do I feel when I feel grief with the sad person? And I kind of, fell in love with that main character. How's my body physically responding to that? And really putting your attention on that and feeling it. That's the first level. And that's the kind of the equivalent of masturbating to a sexual fantasy, right? So you're getting the physical responses, you're becoming aroused by thinking about a story, right? And you're going to get even more out of it by just dropping into the emotions that these particular, and the power dynamics that these particular fantasies are evoking in you. It's going to take it to the next level again if you become the actor that's creating that movie. If you're now on the stage really going into and experiencing the triumph over the baddie, or the falling in love with the hottie on the screen, that's going to be, you know, it's a story still because you're acting on the stage, but you are going somewhere deeper with it. You're really feeling with everything that you've got now, and unconscious parts of you are shifting and changing with it as though it's true, because that unconscious part of us can't tell the difference between play and reality. It does fall in love temporarily. It does triumph it temporarily. It goes through these things. So if we really want to embody sexual fantasies to their fullest extent, we're trusting this unconscious part of ourselves that has sent this message, that it's got some wisdom, and we're going to trust it. We're going to find the key elements in it, and we're going to actually, in the safety of consensual play, actually live it temporarily and see where it takes us. So this really dropping into the full experience of feeling it emotionally, physically, and mentally, and maybe even beyond that, like parts that we can't even have words for.
Mm-hmm. To build on your example of the guy in the bathroom fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
So like one way to put that into, like to map that on there, like I could just, if that was my fantasy, I could just sit there, think about it, get turned on, masturbate. Cool. The next level is I can think about it and start to actually notice what sensations beyond the sensations in my genitals, other emotions, things like that, noticing how that feels. I'm wondering, how do I feel when this woman comes up behind me and grabs me, whatever. And you're saying the third level is becoming the actor in the fantasy. So does that mean, for example, like I'm in my office, wouldn't really matter. I could, start to imagine that the office is actually a stage or a set. It is the bathroom, and I move around this room physically as though I'm actually in the bathroom with this woman. But let's say I'm single, I don't have a partner, I don't want to see a dominatrix, I'm going to do this on my own. I still have to imagine the part of the woman. Like what does the execution of that at the third level or the embodied level look like?
Yeah, I'd love to answer that question, but I'd have to teach you some things first. Like, you have to build some. It's not going to make sense in a podcast. I have to teach you a few layers and build some things up. That's beyond the scope of this. But yes, you absolutely can. There's subtle things that using a combination of your imagination and fantasy and real sensations and body language that you're taking on, you can absolutely enter into an ecstatic state. And I love that bathroom fantasy, because I asked him, why, were you excited because it was public, in a public place? Because you have to check in this. If I was going to be trying to bring as a sex worker trying to bring his fantasy to life, am I going to be drawing on the tabooness of it being public or not? Like, you have to listen to what is his poisons and antidotes, not assume. And he's like, no, absolutely not. I'm not even interested that it's a public place other than the initial part. Like, it's played its role already. And I said, how would you feel if someone walked in while you were getting your hand job? And he, bless him, I just love him. He's beautiful. He's like, I'd be all, get out of here. Can't you see I'm getting my business taken care of? I'm a god. There's my queen. Like, don't come in here. Right. And he's moved in that short space from this, who do you think you are, to, I'm a king. There's my queen. Oh my God, I'm the center of the universe, and so is she, and we're here together, and this is amazing, and completely open and feeling pleasure. But it wasn't from the fear. It wasn't actually from... So actually, to bring that to life, it would be, okay, I'm not going to try and make the public place be the center excitement point. I'm going to just be, we could mention that or include that just in a slight way, even just by just whispering a few things in the ear, like, I'm walking into your bathroom or I'm walking into your office, and that's it. We don't need to emphasize it. It's played its role. But what I would do is I would take on the power dynamic, the emotional, follow the emotional aphrodisiac journey of that whole story, and I would physically take on recognizing that disappearing, like eye contact is brief and proving consent and wanting to be there, but then taking myself out of the picture so he's not obligated to pleasure me as a sex worker. He can focus on his own pleasure and he can feel as though he's special, and that all sexual fantasies make us feel special and make us feel as though the other person magically wants to give us exactly what we want them to want. That's what they do to convince us to let us go. So I would notice the making it so that he can, so that I'm just a pair of hands. That part I would live out literally, but the rest doesn't have to be literal at all, right? That's okay. You can actually live out that same scenario with a whole bunch of different ways that would surprise them completely, as long as it hits all of those points along the way. We've been talking for ages. Should we stop?
We can wrap it up in a second, but no. So I think I was getting confused, thinking, I'm getting too focused on the surface level thing, and really what you're saying is it's not about, like, it's almost like it's not about the movie. If we're talking about a movie, or I think about like another parallel with like the nervous system. It's not even a parallel, but the same thing. But how we get triggered in our day-to-day life. Someone can say something or do something, or there's a situation unfolds that happens to bring up or stir up something from the past in us. And very often it's not the exact same scenario. It's not the exact thing that happened. It's not the bathroom thing that happened back when we were 10 years. It's like the underlying mechanics are the same. And that's why it's so tricky, because we're like, well, this hasn't happened to me before, so obviously why I'm feeling so upset right now is because of you or whoever's, in the environment. And so it's a bit like that, where it's not about the surface level impression, it's the underlying mechanics that you're looking at of what's the dynamic of the situation. So the bathroom almost doesn't really matter. It's just a venue for the dynamic to take place in. And so you're saying you'll take the dynamic or unpack or understand that and then execute that in that playroom in Sydney or wherever. And it may have a different environment, but like that, thing that happens today that triggers us from something that happened 10 years ago, you can trigger the same thing as long as the mechanics are in place.
That's right. Beautifully said. I love the way you described that. Thank you. Yeah, that's excellent. We're so focused on the trauma level at the moment, because trauma is such a buzzword of thinking about triggers as only bad things. But actually what we're doing is we're noticing that desires symbols are interchangeable. They're just trying to create an effect, and this is the mechanism underneath it that triggered that effect. And now we can play with it infinitely. We don't have to be stuck doing the same sex rut over and over again. We can just hear what those wonderful triggers are and come up with creative ways to play forever with them. So it's fun. Yeah. It's really fun.
All right. It sounds great. I mean, I've explored it a little bit. I've got to figure this thing out. It's on the list. But on that note, let's wrap it up. So if people want to learn more about you, what you do, this desire compass, how to, just go further down this rabbit hole. I was going to say glory hole. You want to go down this glory? How far down the glory hole do you want to go? So if anyone wants to do that, go learn more about this. Where's the best place or places for them to do that?
Yeah, sure. My website is just my name, artemisiadevine.com, and you can begin the Desire Compass. The first part is up there for you to try if you would like to. It's about 90 minutes, I think. Maybe, yeah. I haven't quite finished, so it could be slightly longer than that. A 90-minute sort of little short course for you to try and see if you can feel these experiences and see if this is for you. Yeah, but keep an eye out for my book too, please.
Fantastic.
That'd be great. The Value of Sexual Fantasies.
Yeah, I'll put the... is that the name of the book?
Yeah, The Value of Sexual Fantasies.
Oh, great. Oh, great. Oh, fantastic. I'll have links to your website, the Desire Compass, and whenever the book's ready, I can add a link to the website too, so that's up there. Get you some link juice. But thank you so much for doing this, Artemisia. This has been thoroughly interesting, and it's given me lots to think, maybe feel about too. Yeah.
It was so fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Did you know that your anxiety is not your fault? Nor is your depression, trouble sleeping, or that icky, sticky imposter syndrome feeling. This is one of my favorite things about the nervous system framework and way of working. I used to blame myself for my various issues. I thought I'd somehow failed, that I was broken, something was wrong with me. But once I understood the mechanics of the nervous system survival response, fight and flight, and some of the things I talk about here on this podcast, and how we adapt to stress and trauma and bad things that happen in our lives, I realized that these various issues, whether it's anxiety or depression or trouble sleeping, whatever it is, I've realized that it's not really my fault. And it's not even really a bad thing. I've realized that my nervous system was actually just doing exactly what it had evolved to do over millions of years too. Keep me safe, right? Imposter syndrome. It's a safety mechanism. Don't stand out. Don't attract too much attention to yourself or you might get hurt. Can't sleep? Again, it's a safety mechanism. Your nervous system is literally trying to keep you safe, and it can't do that if you sleep too deeply because you might fail to detect a threat. Anxiety, your nervous system, it's looking for threats because right now it feels, you guessed it, unsafe. And so if it can find the threat or at least discern whether there even is a threat, then it can relax. So it's all about safety. Now, to be fair, these adaptations aren't always well matched to the present moment, the present environment. But once upon a time, they were exactly what we needed to survive. And that's the beautiful thing. Instead of seeing our issues as problems or flaws or signs that something's wrong with us, that it's some failure on our part as a person, we can actually see them as nature's finest work. That our various nervous tics, our neuroses, the various things we want to change about ourselves because we're not as happy as we want to be. We're not as disciplined. We're not as motivated, whatever it is. We're not happy. We can look at these things as the result of millions of years of evolution, or if you believe in God, call it intelligent design. I don't really care. The point is that these are the very things we needed to survive at some point in our lives. Isn't that amazing? Doesn't it change the whole feeling around our so-called issues, that they're not here to make us feel bad as we sometimes believe. They're here to help us. They're here to keep us alive. The only problem is that while they were suited to a previous environment, for example, we may have learned not to stand out as a kid with our family, at home with our parents, and maybe even at school, because when we stood out, we got in trouble, we got hurt, people made fun of us, we lost love, we lost attention. However the wiring happened, we learned to not stand out. And at that time, it's what we needed. But they're not usually, these various strategies that we have, they're not usually the best strategy for the present environment. For example, if your nervous system really thinks it's unsafe when it's actually safe, such as when you go to bed at night, it's just a sign the system is a little out of sync. That's all. Just out of sync. It's not broken. It's not flawed. It's just designed for a different time and place. And it's doing that job beautifully, but it's out of sync with the present time. And that's where the Daily Growl comes in, my daily email newsletter, where I share stories and tips and tricks and different ways of working with the nervous system, new and interesting and powerful ways of working with anxiety and depression and trouble sleeping and imposter syndrome and all the different issues people have in a very new way, and in a way that doesn't look at these things as problems to be solved, but looks at them more as a once useful program that is no longer serving us. And how do we change that with the science of the nervous system? So that's the Daily Growl, like I said, my daily email newsletter, which is actually what I've just read out here is one of the emails I send out. So if you found this helpful, if you'd like to get more emails like this, go to rageheart.co. That's like Braveheart, but rageheart, like the podcast, .co, no .com, just the .co. And sign up for the Daily Growl on the homepage, and you'll start getting emails like this every day. Bye for now.